Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. This is the third and final part in the Susan Powell video series. Before we get started, I want to wish a couple of my August Patreons a very happy birthday. Jennifer Stevens and Kaz Brooks celebrated their birthdays on August 2nd. Anna Brandolini celebrated her birthday on August 3rd. Ashley Wolf celebrated her birthday on August 6th. Adriana celebrated her birthday on August 9th, and Carolyn Loft celebrated her birthday on August 10th. I want to also give a shout out to a Patreon that I forgot to say happy birthday to in June, and his name is P.O. on June 28th. Happy birthday. Birthdays are really important, guys. I know a lot of people, especially as we get older, we like to pretend that they're not happening, but it's a really special time, and it's a time that you should celebrate and remember like your past and where you came from, and think about the way you used to celebrate your birthdays when you were a little kid or a teenager and how excited you used to feel. Life can get kind of mundane, so you should definitely take your birthday to just celebrate and have fun and be a kid again sometimes. Eat a lot of cake. As always, to my Patreons, you guys support me in so many ways besides financially. You support me emotionally, you're there for me, you guys give me your opinions when I ask about cases and things, and it is invaluable. Okay, so this is the last video. It's crazy. This case is coming to an end. In part 2, I spent a lot of time going over what was going on in Susan and Josh's marriage. I wanted you guys to really understand and feel the way that she felt in this relationship with this man, working so hard and making money, being a good mother and being a good wife, and literally just getting no respect, attention, or love in return. And that was incredibly hard. I wanted you to also get an idea of how absolutely bananas insane Steve Powell and Josh Powell both were in a way. Now, I do think that these two men have legitimate mental illnesses, but since they went on to cause such havoc, such pain, and such heartache, I don't have a lot of sympathy for either of them. When they set Steve Powell up essentially to admit on public television that the journals were important pieces of evidence, they set him up so that they could now go into his home and take those journals and get them out of his possession. But what they found in his house was beyond what I think any of them expected. Steve's journals contain many disturbing things, as we already know, and a lot of it centered around Susan Powell. He wrote about how he followed Susan to work and zoomed in on her legs as she walked towards her car where he was hiding by her car. He said he made a pretense of hiding, but that she knew that he was stalking her and she liked it. And what did he think about Susan's marriage to his son, Josh? According to Steve, he didn't think much of it. He wrote in his journal, "Theirs is truly a marriage made in hell. It's hard to believe that two people could be so nasty to each other before they've even celebrated their 3rd anniversary. In public, they look like the loveliest couple, but in private, they have no respect for each other and little love. At best, Josh is indifferent about her. At worst, he dislikes her intensely, but tolerates her because she is a good piece of ass and keeps the money coming in. Josh hates her so much he even wishes she were dead. He even talks about it, occasionally fantasizing that she might have an accident." Steve Powell is many things. He's delusional, he's disrespectful, he's crazy. But what I don't think he is somebody who purposely writes things in his diary or journals to lie. I don't think that he ever lied in his journals. So going on that assumption, I don't believe that what he said about Josh wishing Susan were dead and fantasizing about an accident was untrue. I believe that it absolutely happened. Steve also blamed Susan for his addiction to her. He was one of those people that could go from extreme loving and glowing talk about Susan to anger and frustration. Why is she doing this to me? She knows what this is doing to me. His obsession with her was causing problems in his life. He wasn't paying bills, he was forgetting appointments. His distraction from his real life responsibilities was a direct result of Susan tempting him, even from miles away. He wrote in his journal that he believed if he didn't act out on these fantasies, there would be a buildup of testosterone in his body and he would become ill. I don't really know if that's how it works, but Even worse, in his journals, years and years later, after his daughter Jennifer was grown and married, he wrote about her and his fantasies about her and an experience that they had had together. This had been when she was a young child, and Jennifer wrote about this in her book called A Light in Dark Places. She said that Stephen Powell, her own father, took her on a road trip, and they were alone, and they stayed in a motel together. And while they were in this motel together, he played for her an adult video. Who knows what Steve Powell did to his daughter that day or thought about doing to her or any other day. I'm sure his journals were a lot more specific. I don't have access to them. However, the fact is, this was a person who was dangerous for young girls to be around. In fact, I think this was a person that it was dangerous for any women to be around. So Steve knows that the police are in his house at this point. He knows that they have access to everything in his little shop of horrors, and he is actually 4 hours away by the time they're in his house and looking for things. And if it had been me, I would have ran. I would have been on the first flight out of the state, out of the country. You wouldn't have seen me again. But not Steve Powell, because he was so truly out of touch with reality that he did not think that anything he said or did was wrong. The most that he felt when they were looking through his house was embarrassment. He thought that he was going to be embarrassed by some of the things. He didn't think that he'd done anything legally wrong. The young girls that lived next door, the ones he was taking pictures of through his window into their bathroom window while they bathed and changed, there weren't just 2 or 3 of these pictures. There was over 1,600 images of these girls. And they only lived there for roughly a year. They lived there from June 2006 to August 2007. So literally just about a year that he must have daily been taking pictures of them and stalking them and looking out his window hoping to catch a glimpse of these very young children. On September 22, 2011, prosecutors filed criminal charges of felony voyeurism and possession of depictions of a minor. They also removed Charlie and Braden from the home. They had no way of knowing if Josh had been complicit in what his father was doing, and there was other strange reports coming out of the house. Josh's brother, John, was known to walk around the house naked, and one day he had answered the door to the police wearing nothing but a diaper. I had to do that take 3 times to say it with a straight face and not laugh. While all of this was happening, his father's being arrested, his children are being taken from him, Josh doesn't come out of the room. Detective Ellis Maxwell said he was 99.9% sure that Josh thought he was being arrested as well. And the police made Josh come outside so that they could inform him of what was happening, that they were taking his kids away. He showed absolutely no emotion. He didn't say goodbye to them. He didn't tell them, it's going to be okay, I'll be there, I'll find you, we'll be together again. He didn't ask to hug them goodbye. He just was like, okay, and that was it. I don't care what the circumstances are, but especially if I'm innocent and I have nothing to hide and I'm a good parent, if these people come to my house and try to take my children away from me, I'm putting up a fight. I'm not just going to stand there and watch my kids be driven away, especially if I've done nothing wrong. Charlie and Braden were placed with a foster family for the weekend while it was figured out what would happen with them on a more permanent basis. While the boys stayed with this family, it was clear that they had been heavily brainwashed by their father and grandfather. Now, the word brainwashed, it's my opinion. Influenced might be a better, more subjective word, but I like to use the word brainwashed because that is exactly what I think happened in the Powell household with those 2 boys. They told the foster family that Mormons were bad, the police were bad, God was bad, pretty much echoing all the sentiments of Steve and Josh. Children, especially of that young age, they don't come up with these concepts or these ideas on their own. They have to be planted in their heads. Once again, this would have been a perfect time to arrest Josh Powell while they were arresting his father, but they didn't. The investigators wanted to have all of their ducks in a row when and if they took Josh to trial. I understand this logic because if Josh had gone on trial for murder and then his lawyer had found some loophole or was able to raise enough reasonable doubt, if he'd been acquitted, they wouldn't have been able to try him for that murder again due to double jeopardy. However, it's insane to me because Josh was their only suspect ever. Even though sometimes they said, oh, we're looking at other people or we're talking to other people, Josh was the only one. Josh was the only one it could have possibly been. And I do believe that given the information we've talked about in just these past couple of videos, put that in front of a jury and they would have found him guilty without a doubt, body or no body. But the police not arresting Josh that day and taking away his children, they would have no idea the domino effect that this would start. The day after his arrest, Steve went to court and pled not guilty on all counts. Josh called his father while he was in jail, reminded him that they were on a recorded line and to be careful about what he said, and then he promised that they were going to get him a lawyer and get him out. Josh also attended a family team decision-making meeting at the Washington State Children's Administration office in Tacoma to make his case about what should happen with his sons now that they were out of his custody temporarily. He teared up as he explained that Braden and Charlie needed to be protected from their grandparents, Chuck and Judy Cox. He did not want his sons placed in their care under any circumstances. When they told Josh about what they'd found in his father's home, he was like, that's interesting, but I didn't know what he was doing to the neighbors. I had no idea. He did say he was aware that Steve was obsessed with his wife, but that happened years ago, and he wasn't going to let something that happened years ago affect his relationship with his father today. The way that Josh downplayed his father's actions, this obviously concerned the officials. Josh did not at all seem concerned about his father's depravities, even going as far as to say that Susan was partially responsible for Steve being obsessed with her, stalking her, taking pictures of her when she didn't know, stealing her things out of the laundry. Braden and Charlie were allowed to go live with their grandparents, Susan's parents, and they were happy to be there, but as soon as they arrived, it was once again clear that they had been being brainwashed by their father and grandfather. As soon as Charlie walked in, he wanted to know if the Coxes were going to abuse them now. And the social worker who was bringing them there did agree with Chuck Cox that clearly somebody had told them that. But when Braden saw a picture of Susan in the living room, he looked at it for a moment and then he said, "That's my mommy, and she was a good mommy." Even though Steve, Josh, Alina, John, and Michael Powell would all sit around in that house and talk about how Susan had run off and left her family, the power of her love for them and their love for her was much too powerful to wipe out the happy memories that they had of their mother. It was now a matter of the kids, where they would go, who they would live with in the end. We've talked about CPS before, how it can sometimes be a flawed system because the basic goal is reunification of the kids and the parents, which is great. However, sometimes it seems as if the rights of the parents supersede the rights of the children, the right that they have to live and be in a safe environment. Josh was the number one suspect in Susan's disappearance. Everybody thought he killed her. And there really shouldn't have been much of a question on whether Braden and Charlie should be reunited with their father while this investigation was going on. On September 28th, Josh and Susan's parents met in court, and Josh said he wanted his sons back. And if he couldn't get his sons back, he wanted them to go back to a foster family. He did not want them to be with their grandparents at any cost. He would rather have had Charlie and Braden go and live with complete strangers rather than be with people who knew them and loved them. The judge disagreed and said the boys would stay put for now, but that Josh could have 3 hours of visitation every Sunday. This visitation would be supervised and it would be done at a designated center for visitations with children and their parents. And the reason that Sunday was chosen was because the Coxes went to church on Sunday and Josh refused to have his sons participate in any religious activities. Josh asked his family and some friends to write and sign declarations that said he was a good father and that he should get his kids back. And they did, even his mother, Terry. In October of 2011, she filed a declaration with the court stating that Josh was a loving and very engaged father to his sons, that they seemed to be thriving with him in spite of the trauma and sadness of their mother's disappearance. She said, quote, "I have talked to the boys myself. They've sounded like normal, happy children, excited to tell me whatever their current interest or project is." She ended the declaration saying, "It is very apparent that the boys love their dad, and he loves them." Terry's letter was one of 8 that Josh attached to a response to a petition that Chuck Cox had filed to retain custody of Charlie and Braden. These letters praised Josh for being such a wonderful father and condemned the Coxes and Josh's sister, Jennifer. In her declaration, Alina referred to Jennifer as her former sister. The Coxes had a lot of work to do with Braden and Charlie. It was apparent to them that some of the practices in Steve Powell's home were not conducive to raising happy or healthy children. When Charlie had been at daycare, he drew a picture that he said was him and his family going camping, and when the counselor asked, "Where's your mother?" Charlie said, "She's in the trunk." The boys had become accustomed to staying up very late at night. They didn't sleep with any clothes on, and they said that they often slept like this in the nude, sometimes with their father. This led many people to believe that there had been some sort of abuse going on in the home. Now, as far as I know, this has never been proven, but from what we know about Steve and Josh and what we will find out about Josh very soon, it's not out of the question that those boys may have been abused. The boys could get very aggressive. They'd become used to fending for themselves. When food was served at dinner, they lunged towards it, just trying to get whatever they could get. Steve ran his home with a survival of the fittest mentality, that if you wanted something, you had to take what you wanted. Oftentimes at meals with Steve and Josh, the adults would take whatever they needed and serve themselves and then pass down whatever was left to the kids to just fight amongst themselves for, like they were dogs getting table scraps. Forensic psychologist James Manley was brought in, and he was tasked to evaluate Josh Powell to see whether he was fit to be a parent. James Manley had done several hundred of these evaluations, but he said that Josh Powell's was unique. Manley said that at first Josh presented as a very down-home guy. He came in wearing a flannel shirt, jeans, he seemed really chill and laid back, but he could become incredibly defensive very quickly. Josh said he didn't use drugs, he didn't drink, and yeah, sure, he looked at some dirty magazines and videos every so often, but he always checked for the disclaimer to say that the women in the videos and the pictures were consenting adults over the age of 18. He is a very responsible porn user. When questioned about Susan, his answers came easily. They were polished, almost as if he had rehearsed them. James Manley said that Josh had traits of narcissism, and he was incapable of seeing himself as a flawed person. James also noticed that Josh didn't see himself and his children as separate entities. So he didn't see Braden as Braden and Charlie as Charlie, separate individuals with their own personality and their own likes and dislikes. He saw them pretty much as extensions of himself, little Josh 1 and little Josh 2. Josh had been told that he would not be allowed to have his sons for an overnight visit until he moved out of Steve Powell's house. So Josh rented a 3-bedroom house close to Charlie's school. James Manley, the psychologist, went with the boys when Josh first brought them to this house to show them around, and he said that Josh seemed to be very interactive and engaged with them, very patient, but there was just something about the house and Josh and the relationship with the kids. He wasn't quite sold on Josh being a completely normal guy. And a woman, Nancy, came forward after reading all these statements that Josh was such a great father and a great guy, and she wanted the police to know he was not a great father. She had been vice president at the Precious Stone and Gem Club in Puyallup, and Josh had joined the club a year prior. When Josh would attend club meetings, he would always bring Braden and Charlie. There were not other kids there. This was an adult club with dangerous machinery that children could possibly hurt themselves on, but he brought them anyways. One day she witnessed Josh working with Charlie on one of the rock polishing machines and Braden sitting in the corner just sobbing and wailing and crying for over an hour. She said that Josh did not seem fazed at all by this, that he didn't seem stressed, that maybe Braden's crying was bothering other people. He didn't try to comfort his son. It was almost as if Braden wasn't even there. When another club member approached Josh and suggested that he should probably take care of his crying child, Josh did finally go over to Braden and awkwardly pat him on the back before saying, "Sometimes we just need to let them cry." "Sure, Josh, but not for an hour alone in the corner without a word to them." Josh would bring them to these meetings that would sometimes go on for hours and hours, and as little kids do when they're bored, they run around the room and just cause a ruckus. One time, Braden almost poured hot coffee right on his face, and Josh didn't even notice. The only time he seemed to notice those kids was when they were talking to somebody else, like one-on-one, and then he would interfere. At first, Josh's visitations with the boys, they were supposed to be at this dedicated facility, but then the other parents who were there also having visitation, they began to complain. They didn't feel comfortable with Josh being around them or their kids. That was when the decision was made that Josh should be allowed to have visitation with his sons at his own home. Once again, I will point this out as a mistake on behalf of the system. If other parents were complaining to the extent that it was becoming difficult to have him continue his visits there, then find another facility or find a separate room, anything else but jumping straight to home visits. At this time, they'd still been working on retrieving information from Josh's computers and hard drives that they had confiscated years prior. Because of all the measures he had taken to hide what was on them from others, it was taking a while. But in November, they recovered something very disturbing from one of the hard drives. Josh had several images, cartoon images, hand-drawn images, on his computer that depicted things happening with adults and children that should not be happening with the adults and children. So pretty much at this point, you're thinking, this is bad. This looks bad for Josh. They've got him. Those boys are not going to be placed back in his custody. This is proof that there's something wrong with this man. You'd be wrong. The police in Utah had to get permission from a judge before being able to show this new evidence to the law enforcement or the police in Washington state. And this judge decided that they should just hang on to these and wait on it a little while, and that they should only be allowed to show what they'd found to the authorities in Washington state if it appeared that the authorities were getting ready to put Braden and Charlie back in Josh Powell's custody. What kind of backward system do we have in place in this country to protect our children? A question I've often asked myself while going through this. Debbie Caldwell, the boys' daycare provider in Utah, also called the police. She expressed her concerns about the boys being with Josh, and they told her as long as he's not beating them, we really can't do anything. At the end of November, the courts decided that the accusations against Josh were unfounded and that if he followed all of their rules, he could start the process of getting his sons back. This would have been the perfect time to bring the new evidence from Utah to Washington state to show them that there was in fact a cause to be concerned, but that didn't happen. The information was not provided to West Valley Police, so they had no idea that this process had even started. In December, James Manley submitted his first report on Josh Powell. He did not recommend immediate reunification. Instead, he suggested that Josh be seen a few times a week by someone who specialized in narcissistic personality disorder. He thought that increasing the supervised visits to 2 or 3 times a week would serve the dual purpose of keeping Josh and his sons connected while still keeping Braden and Charlie safe. Around the end of January, a website popped up. It was called For the Kids. It's spelled with the number 4, the word the, and kids is spelled Kidzz. On it was an essay which accused West Valley Police of spending millions of dollars in a campaign to harass the Powell family. The searches for Susan in the deserts and mines were called charades, and there was no evidence to support Steve Powell's voyeurism arrest. The Coxes were accused of abusing Braden and Charlie since Braden had accidentally burned himself and had to be admitted to the emergency room, but this essay said it was intentionally done to him in order to punish him. Everyone just wanted to lynch Josh, but Josh was squeaky clean. This essay was written by Michael Powell. The site was run and created by Michael Powell. He published court documents and he published emails sent to Josh by CPS and the police. And when the department found out, they asked Josh, what the heck is this website? You're supposed to be working to get your sons back, not talking crap about everybody on the internet. And Josh claimed he had no idea that his brother had set that website up, even though a lot of the documents on there, Michael would have had to have gotten directly from Josh. Finally, the weird cartoons and the computer-generated sketches that were found on Josh's hard drive were brought to the attention of the Washington police after months of the West Valley Police trying to do so. James Manley, once he saw these, he wrote a follow-up report to his initial report. He was concerned over the images. He said that Josh having them showed his global approval over such acts. He gave his recommendation that Josh needed to undergo a psychosexual evaluation. This kind of evaluation would consist of 4 parts. The first would be a meeting between the therapist and the client, just a getting to know you, let's get comfortable talking together kind of meeting. The second stage would include various psychometric tests like a personality test or an intelligence test. The third would be a physiological evaluation of arousal. They do this using certain instruments, which would be attached to certain areas of the body to measure blood flow to that area of the body, if you know what I mean. The subject would then be shown various images to see what things they react to. This is followed by the fourth and final stage, which is a risk evaluation. So basically, they're going to determine whether this person is a risk to themselves or others, and how likely it is that they'll repeat the behavior that landed them in the psychosexual evaluation to begin with. When Josh was given the news that he would have to go through this evaluation, I think it was the final straw for him. I think he knew under that kind of scrutiny that he would not hold up, and the image that he had tried to build of himself as this loving father and good person would fall down around him like a house of cards. While everybody was celebrating their win, knowing that the kids would most likely be placed with their grandparents more permanently, Josh was getting ready for his final act of violence. A few days later, Josh went to the bank, took out some money, and then transferred the rest of the money into his sister Alina's account. He then went to a storage unit he owned, spent an hour there gathering some things, dropping them off at a recycling plant, and then mailed the key to the storage unit to Alina. It was the last time he was planning to go to his bank or his storage unit. He removed all of his son's books and toys that he had placed in the new house and donated them. He knew they would never be playing with them again. The morning of February 5th, Alina received several emails from her brother. They were mostly just emails telling her how to handle his property and manage his affairs. She didn't think much of them, but then she got a voicemail from Josh on her phone, and it scared her. He said on the voicemail, "I'm calling to say goodbye. I am not able to live without my sons, and I'm not able to go on anymore. I'm sorry to everyone I've hurt. Goodbye." She called 911 and she explained to the 911 operator that her brother was sending weird emails. She was worried that something was happening to him or he was going to do something to himself. The 911 operator asks, "What's the address?" But Alina doesn't know it. So the operator's like, "Okay, is this the same Josh Powell that's been on the news?" And Alina starts crying about how hard it's been on him, how people have been harassing him. They've been abusing him. So they tell her that they're going to send someone over there. They'll figure out the address, look it up, they'll send someone over there. February 5th, 2012 was also Super Bowl Sunday. Elizabeth Griffin Hall was bringing Charlie and Braden for their scheduled visit with their father. She arrived at Josh's house around noon. When she pulled into the driveway, Josh was waiting at the door, and Charlie and Braden darted out of the car, excited to see their father, and they ran in the house past Josh. She heard him tell the boys, "I have a surprise for you." As she followed the boys up to the house that they'd already run into, Josh locked eyes with her and then slammed and locked the front door. At first, she thought it was a mistake or an accident. She knocked on the door, she rang the doorbell, and when no one answered, she began pounding on the door, demanding that Josh let her in. Panic began to build in her as the seconds passed and there was no answer at the door. And then she smelled gasoline. And then she heard a small child crying inside the house, Charlie or Braden. So she called the police. "I'm going to play this 911 call for you. It will most likely make you angry. It will make you frustrated. And it will make you wonder, how are these people being trained? Just keep in mind that the man, this dispatcher, afterwards understood where he went wrong, and he now trains other operators in how to do the right thing. So just try to remember that through your anger."
Hey, I'm on a supervised visitation for a court-ordered visit, and something really weird has happened. The kids went into the house, and the parent, the biological parent, whose name is Josh Powell, will not let me in the door. What should I do?
What's the address?
It's 8119, and I think it's 89th. I don't know what the address is.
Okay, that's pretty important for me to know.
Sorry, I can't. Just a minute. Let me get in my car and see if I can find it. Nothing like this has ever happened before at these visitations, so I'm really shocked. And I could hear one of the kids crying, but he still wouldn't let me in. Okay, it is just a minute. I have it here. You can't find me by GPS?
No.
But I think I need help right away. He's on a very short lease with CSHS, and CPS has been involved. And this is the craziest thing. He looked right at me and closed the door. Are you there?
Yes, ma'am. I'm just waiting to know where you are.
Okay. It's 8119 189th Street, Court East, Puyallup, 98375. And I'd like to pull out of the driveway because I smell gasoline and he won't let me in.
You want to pull out of the driveway because you smell gasoline, but he won't let you...
He won't let me in.
He won't let you out of the driveway?
He won't let me in the house.
Whose house
Got
is
the
it?
kids in the house and he won't let me in. It's a supervised visit.
I understand. Whose house is it?
Josh Powell.
Okay, so you don't live there, right?
No, I don't. No, I'm contracted to the state to provide supervised visitation.
I see. Okay. And who is there to exercise their visitation?
I am. And the visit is with Josh Powell.
And who
And he is
supervises?
the husband that I supervise.
So you supervise and you're doing the visit?
Yeah,
You're
I
supervising yourself?
I supervise myself. I'm the supervisor here.
Wait a minute. If it's a supervised visit, you can't supervise yourself. If you're the
I
visitor...
do supervise myself. I'm the supervisor for the supervised visit.
Okay, well, aren't you the one making the visit? Or is there another
I'm the
parent
one-
that you're supervising?
No, I'm the one that supervises. I pick up the kids as their grandparent.
Yes. And then who visits with the children?
Josh Powell.
Okay, so you're supposed to be there to supervise Josh Powell's visit with the children.
Yes, that's correct.
And how did...
And he's the husband of missing Susan Powell. This is a high-profile case.
How did he gain access to the children before you got
He
there?
I was one step in back of them.
Okay, so they
He
went
shut
into the
the
house
door
and
in
then he
my face.
locked you out.
Yeah, he shut the door right in my face.
All right, now it's clear. Your last name?
My name is Elizabeth Griffin Hall.
Griffin Hall is hyphenated?
Yes.
And what's your phone number, Elizabeth?
This cell phone number is 360-990-9955.
And what agency are you with?
Foster Care Resource Network. And the kids have been in there by now approximately 10 minutes. And he knows
How
this
many
is
children?
a supervised visit. 2. Braden is 5 and Charlie is 7.
And the dad's last name?
Powell, P-O-W-E-L, L.
2 L's? 2 L's at the end of Powell?
Yes.
His first name?
His first name is Josh.
Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, native?
He's white.
Date of birth?
I don't know. He's about 39.
How tall?
5'10", 150 pounds.
Hair color?
Brown.
Did you notice what he was wearing?
No, I didn't notice what he was wearing.
Is he alone then, or is anybody
I
else
don't know. I couldn't get in the house.
there? Are you in a vehicle now or on foot?
I'm in a vehicle. I'm in a Prius, a
color?
2010 Prius,
What color
with
is
the
it?
doors locked. But he hasn't opened the door.
Ma'am,
I rang the
careful.
doorbell and everything.
What color
I
is it?
begged him to let me in.
Elizabeth, please listen to my questions. What color is the Toyota Prius?
Gray, dark gray.
And the license number?
I don't know. I can look.
All right, we'll have somebody look for you there.
Okay, how long will it be?
I don't know, ma'am. They have to respond to emergency, life-threatening situations first. The first available deputy
Well,
is responding.
this could be life-threatening. He went to court on Wednesday, and he didn't get his kids back. And this is really, I'm afraid for their lives.
Okay, has he threatened the lives of the children previously?
I have no idea.
All right, we'll have the first available deputy contact you.
Thank you.
Bye.
It's frustrating because he seems to just keep asking her the same questions. He seems confused. It's like he doesn't know how to do his job. That's how you feel when you're watching it. It's like she's told you a million times. But regardless, like I said, he understands where he went wrong. But after Elizabeth gets off the phone with 911, she decides it's a good idea to move her car across the street because she smelled gasoline coming from the house. And pretty much as soon as she parks her car across the street, that house goes up in flames. There was a fire station just about a quarter of a mile away, and Elizabeth could hear sirens, but no fire truck showed up. at Josh Powell's house to put out the blaze and hopefully save whoever was in there. She placed another, more panicked 911 call.
Hello?
Hi, ma'am. Were you calling about the fire in the 8200 block of
Yes, he
188th Street,
exploded
Courtney?
the house.
Ma'am,
Yes,
do you know
he
the
exploded the house.
okay? Do you know the exact address of the house, or are you?
Yes, it's 8119 189th Street, Court East,
Okay.
2 hours.
Okay, stand line. Do you know if anyone's in the house?
Yes, there was a man and
Okay.
2 children. I just dropped off the children, and he wouldn't let me in the door.
Okay, stand line for the fire department. Okay, I'm going to get them on the line. Do not hang up. Hold on. Stay on the phone here with me, ma'am. Hi, fire. This is Rose at Lisa, transferring a lady who has an exact address of the house that is on fire there in the 188th Street, Court East neighborhood.
Yes? Okay, what is gave them that exact address? I dropped it, sorry. Just a minute. I can hear the fire trucks, but they're not here yet. It's 8119. There. What? We have an engine there. And people are saying there's not somebody here, but I was just there, and there is somebody here. There's 2 little boys in the house, and they're 5 and 7, and there's an adult man. He has supervised visitation, and he blew up the house and the kids. The kids and the husband and the father were in the house? Yes, he slammed the door in my face. So I kept knocking. I thought it was a mistake. I kept knocking, and then I called 911. You saw him go back into the house when the flame, right before the flames? He didn't ever leave the house. He just opened the door. The kids were 1 step ahead of me. They're 5 and 7. They were 1 step ahead of me, and he slammed the door in my face. And you think he might have done this intentionally? Yes. Okay. County, go ahead with what you need. I'll pass that on to my...
Thank you very much, fire. Ma'am, what is your name, please?
I'm Elizabeth Griffin Hall, and I'm the supervised visitor.
Okay, hold on. Elizabeth, hold on just a moment. Ma'am? Okay, so your last name is Griffin what?
Griffin Hall, Griffin hyphen Hall, Hall.
Okay, and your phone number 360-990-9955 is your personal cell number. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
correct.
Where are you at right now?
I'm at 81112 on the same court.
Okay, so you're waiting down the street at 8112 109th Street Court, 189th Street Court East.
Yes.
Okay. And are you in your car?
I was in my car. I'm standing outside it right now.
Okay. Is that your home? Is that your home address?
No, that's not my home
Okay.
address. I was the supervised visitation coordinator. I picked the children up. Parents.
What is this person's name?
His name is Josh Powell. Just a minute, the sheriff's here. Let me
Okay.
tell him the
Go ahead and talk.
in the house.
Go ahead and talk to the officer, ma'am.
It's incredibly frustrating. And at one point, you hear the dispatcher saying, no, we have a truck there. It's there already. But there was nobody there. And Elizabeth is watching this house just being engulfed by flames, and she has to explain the same thing over and over again. They found Josh, Braden, and Charlie in a back bedroom. Next to Josh, there was a burnt metal hatchet. It was clear that Josh had used this hatchet on his boys to knock them unconscious before setting the house on fire. The crying that Elizabeth had heard from inside the house was most likely one of the boys witnessing this happening to his brother. Charlie and Braden were buried in Woodbine Cemetery in one casket under a single headstone that bore a picture of Susan and her sons. It's engraved with the words, "United in Heaven," in the hope that someday Susan will be found and she can be buried with the boys that she loved so much. At first, there was some controversy about the burial. Josh's family thought that Josh should be buried with Braden and Charlie in Woodbine Cemetery. Obviously, most people in the world who have compassion and a heart and a brain in their heads thought that this was outrageous and should not happen. Terry had changed her mind slightly since she filed the petition saying that Josh was such a great father and that he loved his boys so much, and she said, yes, under no circumstances is Josh going to be buried next to his sons, but we will make other arrangements for him. So, Josh is gone. Braden and Charlie are gone. Susan is gone. They're all gone, and there's no answers. There's no more answers now than there was before. Steve and Josh were not the only 2 members of the Powell family that police suspected might be involved in Susan's disappearance. Michael Powell fell under suspicion when some new evidence was discovered. 2 weeks after Susan disappeared, Michael Powell had paid to have his car towed to a salvage yard, like 100 miles away from where he was at that time. He sent it there with the hopes that it would be destroyed, but Detective Maxwell was able to retrieve the car just before it was destroyed, almost 2 years later. So that in itself, Michael having a car and selling it to a salvage yard, it's not weird, but here's the whole story. On December 21st, the same month that Susan went missing, Michael and Alina were driving back to Puyallup from Utah after they'd visited with their brother. As they were driving, it seemed like they had some car trouble, so they had to stop and pull over in Baker City, Oregon. And Alina called AAA and said that she needed a tow. But she wanted the car towed to Pendleton, which was 97 miles away from Baker City. AAA told her there was many closer places that they could get the car looked at, but Alina insisted, no, it had to be Pendleton. Pendleton is where Michael would drop his car off at that salvage yard. When they looked into Michael Powell's phone activity around the time Susan went missing, they found some suspicious behaviors. His usual phone activity was to make and receive several calls a day, but on Friday, December 4th, 2009, he seemed to receive a spam call, and then he shut his phone off. No activity on it for the next 2 days. The day Susan disappeared, December 7th, Michael called his voicemail, and about that same time, Josh would have been coming back from his camping trip. Then the phone went dark again until December 12th, when he and Alina were driving to Utah to visit Josh and comfort him in the wake of his wife going missing. So they went to Minneapolis to question him in October of 2011. Michael had seemed to be the most normal of the Powell children who had remained loyal to their father after their parents' divorce. He had enlisted in the Army in 2002 and trained in human intelligence. He learned Korean and he was stationed in South Korea and England. After being honorably discharged in 2007, he got into politics, running for a seat in the Washington legislature. He earned a 2-year degree in intelligence operations and a 4-year degree in international studies. He then started at the University of Minnesota in 2010, working towards his PhD. During the questioning of Michael, he frankly and straight out told the investigators, even if I knew what Josh had done, I wouldn't tell you. And they told him, well, that's kind of obstruction of justice, and it could definitely affect your PhD program and your life in general. During Operation Tsunami, they'd heard on the tap that Michael warned Josh several times that the police were probably listening. He also explained to Josh that they should start communicating in encrypted emails, and he told Josh how to do that. He prepared Josh, giving him help and advice on how he should go into an interrogation and not incriminate himself. Long before anybody knew that the police were tapping the Powell phones, Michael Powell seemed to know, possibly because he was studying intelligence, so he kind of understood that these things happen, possibly because he was just a smart kid. It was also discovered that a month after Susan's disappearance, Josh had made an amendment to their trust. He removed Chuck Cox altogether. After Steve Powell was arrested, Josh made some more changes. Michael and Alina and John would now be the beneficiaries of his life insurance. 93% of it would go to Michael Powell, 4% would go to Alina, and 3% would go to John. He wrote a letter explaining this to Michael. He said that Alina would be the best possible caregiver for Braden and Charlie if something were to happen to Josh, but she wasn't that good with money. Michael would need to control the money, and John and Alina would just squander it. He said he loved Alina, but she really needed to learn job skills. She would be able to learn these skills better by having less money available to her. The irony is not lost on me that Josh Powell is trying to give someone else financial advice. He's literally the pot calling the kettle black. Not good with money, would squander it, needs to learn job skills. Check, check, check. There's Josh Powell. 2 months after Michael was questioned by the police, he visited the website for a satellite imaging company. Now, these companies basically allow, regular people to just buy satellite images. The company will own a satellite and they'll take pictures of certain areas at certain times, and the people can request these images and they pay for them. It's a business. He told the company that he needed an aerial photo taken of Pendleton, Oregon in October of 2011 or later. They told him they only had photos from August or before. So he was like, no, I don't need those. It has to be October or later. It has to be more recent. So if you get any more images, just please let me know. Why did he want those pictures so badly? What he was hoping to see was whether or not the car that he had turned into that salvage yard was still sitting in the yard. And if it was able to fall into the hands of police. But by this time, the police already had access to the car. We know this because months later, in cooperation with the police, that satellite company called Michael Powell and said they had the images he was looking for, more current. But could he be more specific about what he was looking for in Pendleton so that she could make sure the image that she had included what he was looking for? And he specifically said he was looking for the lot of Lindell Auto. When she told him that their picture only covered a portion of the lot, he said, that's fine, I want it anyways, and even was talking about paying over $2,000 to have their satellite tasked specifically to take a picture for him. When they found the car in that lot, they brought cadaver dogs in, and in literally a graveyard full of old cars that are dented up, have probably been in accidents, who knows what's happened to them. The cadaver dogs made a beeline for Michael Powell's Toyota Corolla. It indicated on the trunk, so they took the car back to Utah to have a forensics team look through it. They didn't really find much. They found some hair, which lifted their spirits. They thought maybe it was Susan's hair, but the hair came back negative for Susan's DNA. The day after Charlie and Braden's funeral, Michael and Alina tried to claim Josh's life insurance. The life insurance company really didn't know what to do, considering that Susan's name was still a part of this policy and that she technically wasn't dead. She was missing and she could show up anytime and lay claim to it, so they didn't really know what they should do. So it kind of got put on hold for a while, but Alina wasn't too busy trying to benefit financially from the deaths of her brother and her nephews to go to Steve Powell's hearing. Steve was trying to get the evidence against him thrown out, claiming that the police had gone into his house illegally. His defense lawyer said that it was a fishing expedition, and Alina publicly made a statement that her father should be released and that there'd been a lot of hanky-panky going on the part of the police. I know I say some weird things, guys, but Alina said hanky-panky. That wasn't me. Steve's trial began in mid-May, and Alina was there again. His attorney said there was no proof Steve took the pictures or what he had used them for. He tried to suggest that maybe Steve Powell was just a nosy guy who liked to spy on his neighbors. And where's the crime in that? The jury wasn't buying it. They came back with a guilty verdict. Alina was outraged. Following in her brother's footsteps, Alina created a website on which she claimed there was an abuse of authority, that Susan had felt perfectly comfortable around Steve. Later, Alina, in an interview with Oxygen, would say that there was never really anything in those photos that led to the women or the girls in Steve's pictures suffering a harm. She also said that the pictures were taken through an open window and the girls chose to be visible. Typically, I would not go so hard on somebody I don't know, but this girl, Alina, an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old child, chose to be visible in the privacy of their own bathroom so that your creepy ass father could take pictures of them? I don't think so.
Electric chair.
While he was behind bars where he belonged, Steve occupied himself with writing a novel about Joseph Smith and trying to sue for the wrongful death of his grandsons, seeking $20 million. On October 20th of 2012, Michael was compelled to fly to New York to be deposed for the life insurance thing. He was under oath and he was asked questions about a number of things. But when they started asking him if he had a Facebook account, what name was it under, how often did he use it, things like that, he lied. He said first that yes, he did have a Facebook account, but he didn't use it that much, and it was under the name Michael Powell, but he didn't know if there was a middle initial or what middle initial he'd used, because, why would you use your own middle initial? You have to be confused about what middle initial you might have used. I can't. However, police had discovered during the wiretap that Michael had a sort of catfishing Facebook page, and he'd called Josh and given him the username and the password to it so that Josh could go on and creep on people too. The Facebook page was under the name Molly Hunt, and Molly Hunt had joined a couple groups, people looking for Susan and trying to spread awareness and information about Susan. Josh and Michael had been heard on the phone using this account to monitor conversations about searches and what the police were saying and what people thought in general. On the day of the Ely search, Michael had signed into the account, changed the password, and then 20 minutes later, Josh had signed into the account. So pretty much I think what happened was there were searches going on. People were talking about the searches in Ely on Facebook. and Michael was watching, but Josh wanted to see what was happening too. So Michael was like, okay, I'm going to change the password and you can access it and look for yourself. So they were super interested, I guess, in what was happening in Ely and what people were finding or what people were thinking. Now, there's a recording of this deposition, and you can hear it in episode 15 of the Cold podcast. At the timestamp in that podcast, at about 54 minutes, when Michael is answering a question about whether or not he believed that Josh had anything to do with Susan's disappearance, he answers he doesn't think so. And then he goes on to say, in the months following her disappearance, he sort of stumbles over his words. I personally think that he almost slipped up there, that he was about to say in the months following her death before he caught himself and recovered. But he didn't recover quick enough for it to not be noticeable, to me at least. So if you guys are listening to the podcast, or if you're not listening to the podcast and you just want to see what I mean, go to that episode, go to the timestamp, 54 minutes, and listen. And let me know in the comments if you agree with me. I will actually put a link. I think it's on YouTube, so I'll put a link of the podcast in the description box so you can kind of go there quicker. 4 months after this deposition, Michael Powell jumped from the roof of a 7-story building in downtown Minneapolis. Witnesses said he hit the ground and immediately died. Why did he take his own life? Did he know something? Was he feeling guilty about something? Did he feel like the police were closing in on him? Was he worried that they would get their hands on that car and find something out? In that deposition 4 months before, he'd been asked, did you sell a car during this time or this time? And you could tell he was taken aback because he didn't know that anybody else knew about that car. And that deposition let him know that people did know, and they would maybe be working on getting their hands on it and testing it. What was he worried about? Why would he take his own life at 30? Was he involved in the disappearance and subsequent death of Susan Powell? We will probably never know his role, if any, but I believe that he did have a role, even if he wasn't an active participant in it. Michael was the person that Josh trusted more than anyone in the world, and if he was going to confess what he did to anyone, it would have been him. Steve Powell died of a heart attack in a hospital in Tacoma, Washington in 2018. He was believed to have been 68. These 3 men together, Josh, Michael, Steve, they may have held the key to what happened to Susan. But of the 3, there was no deathbed confessions of any kind. There was no last-minute attack of morality or conscience. I tend to think this is due to a personality trait that the Powell men share, a narcissism, a need to have control, to control others, an unwillingness to give an inch. They probably got a kick out of knowing that they were leaving the world and they were leaving everybody with no answers. There's a lot of theories about what happened to Susan, but the one I tend to agree with the most is the one that Chuck Cox had come up with. He believed that Josh poisoned Susan that day he was making her lunch, that he put poison in her pancakes. It wasn't characteristic of Josh, like I said, to make her lunch and take care of her and put a blanket around her shoulders. This wasn't what he would do. So he did something out of the ordinary. He made her lunch, and afterwards she started to feel tired. It's very possible that Josh did put poison into her food, and after that he left just as Giovanna had seen him leave, and he took both of the boys out of the house so that she would die. And when he came back, she'd already be gone, and all he'd have to worry about was disposing the body. But what did he do with her body? His movements were so erratic that day and the following days that it's really hard to know what he did. But I do think that she could be anywhere. My theory, the day that Josh went in to talk to the police, the day he was 3 hours late and then they decided to keep his van, he hadn't expected that was happening. So I believe that he called Michael when he was coming back from his camping trip, when Michael turned on his phone and got that voicemail, and he had planned with Michael to rendezvous the next day. Possibly Josh could have stored Susan's body somewhere, but he was planning on meeting Michael to pass her off. Now what happened is there was a wrench thrown in Josh's plan when the police decided to keep his van, and it was taking a really long time, and that's why he couldn't wait. He couldn't wait to get his vehicle back. He had to go and rent a car and meet his brother. So it shows there was something like 800 miles on Josh's rental car. So a normal person would think, okay, so she must be somewhere within this 800-mile radius. However, that wouldn't be the case if Josh had met Michael halfway or some way, and Michael had taken the body the rest of the way. We don't know what his movements were. His phone was off. Remember, Michael's phone was off at this time, and it didn't turn back on until he and Alina were driving to Josh's house several days later. So Michael Powell could have been anywhere, and we will never know. That's my theory. I definitely think that Josh had help. There's a lot of false leads and eyewitnesses. A cashier at the Flying J said that she saw Josh and Susan and Charlie and Braden that night, and that they said they were going camping, and she thought it was odd because it was so cold, but she says Susan was with them. She believes to this day she was the last person to see Susan Powell. And it's an interesting theory. Did Josh somehow convince or force Susan to go on this camping trip with them in the middle of the night? And then he did it while they were out there? Who knows? That might corroborate the story that Charlie told the police that his mother had gone camping with them, but she decided to stay behind where the pretty flowers and the pretty crystals were. The cashier story could never be verified. The surveillance footage had been recorded over, the man paid with cash, and then they were gone. But she did say that the man had a small child, almost a baby in his arms, that the woman was kind of running after an older child that they called Charlie, and that they left the store and they got into a silver van. And then you have Steve Powell's theory, the Stephen Kocher theory. And I think it's ridiculous. I don't think that the two cases are connected at all. But you do have people out there who believe, like Steve Powell, that there's some sort of connection. Steve said that Susan ran off with a man named Stephen Kocher. He said that they'd run off together to live in Brazil. Now, Kocher disappeared on December 13th of 2009, about a week after Susan disappeared. In the past, he had worked at the Salt Lake Tribune, which was close by to where Susan had worked at Fidelity at that time. But he was last seen in Nevada, 400 miles away from Susan. Stephen Kocher was also a member of the LDS Church, and according to Steve Powell, he was Susan's type. Even though Steve Powell had never met him, he wrote in his journal, Susan has always been attracted to bad boys. I sort of visualize Stephen Kocher as a ne'er-do-well who carries around a guitar and a skateboard, and who has a college degree by virtue of his parents' affluence. Steve had solved the case basically, okay? So he was on Reddit, like thinking that they were typing on Reddit under some other names. He said that Susan would most likely have adopted a dark-haired Latin look, and that the police should go to Brazil and look in cosmetology stores for evidence. Even Josh Powell told his father, like, that's not true, okay? It's kind of far-fetched. There's no proof or evidence that Stephen Kocher and Susan had ever met or even run in the same circles. They were in completely different cities when they both disappeared a week apart. And it's not really possible. It's an interesting Reddit theory. It's an interesting theory to kind of throw around and be like, what if? But it's not possible or true. I think in conclusion, we can all agree that Josh Powell killed his wife, Susan, allegedly. What happened leading up to it? What happened to make him finally decide that he was going to get rid of her? What happened after? Where did he go? Who did he turn to for help? Who did he talk to? What did he do with her? I sadly believe that we will never know. I do believe that Susan is probably in one of those mine shafts. There are so many abandoned mine shafts, and they are very treacherous, very dangerous. And it's really hard, especially if he may have kicked some of the shaft loose so that it fell down and looked like it wasn't open anymore. It's really hard to determine which one she could be in. And it's hard to get people in there, and it's hard to even get cameras in there sometimes because it's dark and there's twists and turns, and it would be really difficult, especially this many years later, to identify a body down there. So I do think that is exactly what he did with her, or what Michael Powell did with her, but she could be anywhere. And these no body cases, they piss me off. And the same was true for the Alyssa Turney case. We know that Michael Turney had something to do with Alyssa Turney's disappearance and possible death. Everybody knows it. There's so much proof and evidence and just things that don't add up. And in this case, with Susan Powell, everybody knows it, but they were so afraid to bring Josh to trial. They were so afraid to put him on trial without a body. They didn't want to put him on trial for murder until they had that body. And it's just ridiculous at this point because the body is great to have. That's obviously super good evidence that the person is no longer alive. But when you have stacked up on the other side, all of this other evidence, circumstantial and otherwise, that shows Josh Has some murdery vibes going on, A. B, terrible alibi that cannot be proved. C, weird. D, won't work with the police, won't cooperate, doesn't know if he wants to even stay and talk to them because he's afraid he's going to be arrested. I mean, his cell phone records, his sketchy movements, everything about him just screams like he is the only possible person that could have done this. And like I said, I believe that if a jury had been, presented with all of that, they would have found him guilty, no problem. Investigators and prosecutors being afraid to bring these no-body cases to court is telling murderers and bad people one thing, and one thing only. If you find a way to destroy or hide the body well enough, it doesn't matter what kind of evidence we have. It doesn't matter how suspicious and creepy you look. You'll get away with it. So we're going to have a whole new breed of murderers that are being created by this precedent saying, well, I mean, my alibi sucks. I have no one to prove I was where I said I was. And I definitely have plenty of motive to kill this person. But as long as I spend the majority of my energy focusing on getting rid of the body, it won't matter. It won't matter how bad it looks. There was a lot of people in this case. Police officers, detectives, investigators, CPS workers, family, friends, a lot of people who cared very deeply for Charlie and Braden and Susan, who wanted to see life go well for them, who wanted to see those kids have a chance at a normal life and, happiness. Sometimes it doesn't matter how many people in the system are good if the system is bad and flawed. Those kids should never have been allowed to have gone to Josh's house when he was a suspect in his wife's disappearance and potential murder. But we can't always blame the system because the system is an inanimate thing that was created by people. And people can now create a different system. When it comes to protecting children, that should be, first and foremost, the most important thing. And if you were with us watching these videos and you saw yourself in Susan, you saw your life in Susan, maybe your relationship in Susan, you do need to understand that you don't have to ever put up with that. You don't ever have to put up with feeling less than. You shouldn't ever be made to feel like you don't matter, or you can't have friends, or you can't have hobbies, or you can't practice whatever damn religion you want, even if it's one you made up in your own head. The person that you're with should never make you feel stupid or bad for things that make you feel happy. That's abusive. It's toxic. It's bad. And you need to seriously consider getting out. It doesn't get better, guys. It only gets worse. Thank you so much for joining me for these videos. I appreciate you guys more than you will ever know. Stay kind and stay beautiful. Bye.